That's today. That's right. We're back to dinner.
Oh, there's weird stuff going on with my phone.
It's not you?
Dave's message popped up on my notification screen, but it's not in the thread.
Oh.
It was like there and then disappeared. So, we just got a message that Scott's on his way in, so we're gonna give him a minute or so. Yeah, I just got that same. Here, if I can slide it over here. They keep falling down from here. I get sick of it being under my feet, so I put it under here.
Hey, Brian, you wanna use the clicker yourself?
Kind of guy I am.
Yeah, should I be over here or over there?
What do you prefer?
I kinda like over there.
Let's go ahead and do that,
Then I
that's
can
fine.
see it, everybody.
Okay. The only thing we'll watch where if they can't get a good camera view of you there, which I think they can.
Oh, this is for
Yeah,
the
they can.
10th
They'll
Street
get you
thing.
with that.
You know, I drove that on.
Do you
I just
use
had to
this
get
then, or do you
I
wanna
did-
just
I
use
liked
the
it during
keyboard
the
up there?
deal, yeah, John and I both did. But I drove it now today as these letters coming out. Oh my, there are a lot of trees. I'm not a fan of that. Those coming down, I have to say. And that last email, was one of my kids' teachers.
Oh, yeah, I love it very well.
Yeah. That's kinda
I
cool.
thought he was closer. Let's get started. We know Scott Corbin's on his way, but I thought he was in the parking lot already, but I don't think he's quite there yet. So we'll get tonight's study session for the Holland City Council started this evening. We're gonna start the meeting as we always do with the study sessions with a public comment period. If members are here to address council, we just want to make sure that you all understand the rules that we go by. With study sessions, we limit public comment to 3 minutes per person. You get one opportunity to speak to council. That is one-way communication. You are communicating to us. We do not respond to questions or in any other manner during the public comment period. And also, please note, there are 3 lights in the dais in front of me. There is a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. And the green light means you're doing all right on time. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute left. And when the red light comes on, your time has expired, and we are very strict about that, about following the time. So if anyone would like to address council at this time, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Is there anyone here who would like to address council? And again, please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Jessica Weaver. I live at 2207 Brighton Street, Holland, Michigan, 49424. Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm a senior at West Ottawa. I know that tonight the council is discussing the possible bike lane on 10th Street. It's come to my attention that the city has actually tested out the cycle track from August 14th to the 24th. And I personally believe that the bike lane would be a perfect addition to the downtown area. Currently, if people wanted to bike through the downtown, they would have to bike on the road. And according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 30% of all bicycle accidents injuries occur when a bicyclist is struck by a car. This staggering statistic, I believe, showcases that there is an extreme need for the safe pathway for bicyclists. Holland is in dire need of infrastructure that supports the sustainable way of getting around. Creating a bike lane is just one simple way to push for a greener future. Once again, I am completely in favor of the proposed idea of the 10th Street cycle lane.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And while Mr. Van Beek is cleaning the podium in between speakers, is there anyone else here who would like to address council at this time? Yes, please come forward. And again, please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, my name is Ed Hislop. I live at 237 Van Raalte on the corner of 10th and Van Raalte. We've owned that property for 7 years. I have been inside and outside the house watching traffic on 10th Street and Van Raalte. I see a lot more bike people on Van Rolte going to South Shore or going north than I do on 10th Street. Therefore, I just don't see spending that kind of money for a bike trail or path. Most streets in Holland that do have it, you know, it's 3 to 4 feet wide, not 12 feet of a whole street. Parking, we're going to eliminate 190 spaces from Lincoln all the way to Van Rolte on the south side if they decide to do that. And I think that's kind of a loss to residents and people at Hope College and the Hayward Center. And I believe that bikes are supposed to ride with traffic and obey the lights and the stop signs. And there are some dangerous intersections on 10th Street, such as Pine and 10th. And I just believe you're looking for trouble as well. So that's my view. I just don't see that much traffic. I see more joggers, people walking, than I do bikers down 10th Street on the west end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Is there anyone else here who would like to address council this evening? And would you please state your name and address for the record?
Good evening. My name is Mika Weiss. I live at 60 East 21st Street, and I'm also here representing Petal Holland. So we haven't seen what's going to be presented yet tonight, so we're very anxious to see what the team has come up with at this stage in the process. But there are two key attributes that we hope this plan retains: comfort and continuity. The power of this unique facility, as experienced in the demo cycle track, is in its comfort, which is a combination of actual increased safety coupled with the harder to measure but equally important feeling of safety. That's what gets people on their bikes, and that's what gives people freedom. Continuity is something that allows a clear path from one space to another without weaving back and forth. This street feels a little safer to me here, but not that intersection. I'm going to jump over a block, jump over 2 blocks. Makes it a lot easier to jump into the car. We're confident that this is going to work, both because of the trial that we saw in our community and experiences that we've seen in other communities. So I'm going to start with other communities and focus on the broader community benefits, primarily for people who are not riding bikes, because we haven't really talked about that much. So we know that cycle tracks are good for people riding bikes, and in other communities, they've seen long-term increases in ridership on places with one of these treatments from 50 to 200%. But cycle tracks are good for everyone else as well. In places where these have been installed, speeding very often decreases. Crashes typically decrease between 34 and 50% in the sources that I was able to find. Traffic flow typically remains similar. In New York City, cycle tracks reduced injury rates for people walking on their street by 12 to 52%. It's more comfortable for drivers when everyone has their own space. And in Washington, D.C., 83% of residents said the protected bike lane on their street was a valuable neighborhood asset. In another survey of several other communities, 80% of people say it increased safety on the street. In our own community, we saw double the number of bike riders during the cycle track trial. We even heard about a couple from South Haven who came from Holland just to try it out. We saw the number of people riding on the sidewalk drop dramatically from 65% last year to 12% this year. This is a powerful number that both shows how uncomfortable most members of our community are riding in the street and how intuitive they found the cycle track. What we're doing right now isn't working for people. I'd also like to share how proud I am in this whole process of our Petal Holland members. Managing a social media page can be interesting, as I'm sure you can imagine. But through this process, both online and in person, I've seen passion, joy, and excitement from our members. This is a remarkable project, and it's being received as such. I haven't had to delete a single comment, and I'm very pleased about that. I'd invite you to visit our website and our Facebook pages to see for yourselves. This is a good project, well executed. The location has been thoroughly vetted. Thank you.
Good timing.
Thank you, Mika. Is there anyone else here who would like to address council this evening? And would you please state your name and address for the record?
I'm Ebony Roach. I live at 1102 Amber Trace Lane, Holland, Michigan. And I guess I just want to talk about at the state park, especially this past summer, there was the water level rose a lot, and there was like high waves that they got to like 7 to 10 feet. And so I'm just hoping that there more can be done to make the public aware of these unsafe conditions, especially if they have small children. So if they're walking on the pier or they're close to the water, that more is done to let people know that this is unsafe and it could cause harm to their small children or people who can't swim very well. So I just hope more can be done to broadcast to either stay out of the water or just make aware that you shouldn't go in the water if you aren't a strong swimmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ebony. Is there anyone else who would like to address council this evening? And please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Maya Cooper. I live at 272 Norwood Avenue, Holland, Michigan. And I just wanted to say thank you for supporting HIAC. I've been a part of it for 3 years now, and it's been a really positive and educational experience for me. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Maya. Anyone else who would like to address council this evening? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. Next item on our agenda, the 10th Street and the cycle path update. Mr. Van Beek.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say much here. We're going to hand it off to Brian. And I'm going to start just by expressing my appreciation to Brian and his team. I think they've put an amazing amount of work into this process. I know it's probably something that you've seen comments and received comments on. Again, I'll just say we did a demo out there, and we did a demo to get information, and I think it definitely gave us information and it raised awareness of it, and it was successful at that. Brian is going to go through with you what their findings are, and I will let you know that he was working on that late last night and into today, and we were still tweaking the presentation yet this afternoon. So I think you'll be impressed by the amount of information and still some of that came in, like I said, just yesterday. So Brian is going to walk through. In the end, you will see that there is a recommendation that we're going to make. I think that's our duty as staff in most situations to come back with a recommendation. You'll hear from Brian, though, that it's a close call on something, but you'll also hear why in the end we're kind of leaning in one direction rather than another in particular. So again, Brian, thank you, because I know this was a tremendous amount of work, but on a very important project. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Good evening, Mayor Box. Good evening, council members. Good evening, members of the public and the viewing audience at home. Wanted to click through some slides here and just give an update on 10th Street, and of course that included that cycle path trial. Agenda, basically the hot topics. Want to talk about timeline, just make sure everyone's familiar with the project limits, talk about design elements, review some background information, again trying to address the questions that have come up over the course of the last few weeks and months, and then go through in a little bit more depth about the cross sections that we're considering, and then the recommendation, which is kind of a hodgepodge of a few different options here. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the timeline, basically self-explanatory here, but one of the big things that we are faced with, because there's some funding on this project, federal funding through MDOT, the time it takes to get through the review process and the bidding process with MDOT is several months long. So that's why we find ourselves here, not quite to the fall, or just getting into the fall, the year prior to construction, and really having to set a date out there to try and at least get what I'll call the conceptual design done. There's a difference there between conceptual design and detailed design. So basically, if we can address the conceptual design, and that's more the 50,000 feet, what kind of elements do we want to have in the project? Then what we can do over the course of the next several weeks is move ahead with the detailed design that basically puts all the nuts and bolts on that, gets all the pay items. There's probably going to be 300 some odd pay items with various quantities. So again, want to, by October 7, get that conceptual design down so that we can move ahead with the detailed design. Go ahead and bid that out over the course of the winter, have a bid opening in April, and then still be on schedule for construction in May after tulip time, after Hope College gets out of their classes there in the spring. So again, 10/7 is really lining up to be a critical date for us. And again, it's more conceptual, right? We just want to get down what we want to see ingredients-wise in the project, and then we'll put the details on it. So the next slide here just talks about the project limits. Again, it's primarily 10th Street from Van Raalte to Lincoln, a little under 2 miles. The pieces there on College Avenue and Columbia Avenue are important, but they are somewhat ancillary to the overall project. But what it does is just with the construction that we have done in the past, it just kind of links everything up nice and together. So we did want to include a couple of those stubs on those side streets to make that happen. So now just going through the design elements here, and this is typical of most reconstruct projects. We're talking about utilities, sanitary sewer. There's some elements of sanitary sewer that's fairly new and pretty good shape, primarily at the west end. So that west end construction will probably go a little quicker just because we don't have that deep utility that we have to replace. So, but there is some sanitary sewer, particularly on the east end. We've talked with the BPW more recently about water main, and they are interested in doing pretty much the whole stretch of water main. There's a few pieces and parts, but again, looking at the age of the water main and things like that, I think that's kind of brought that up to the surface a little more. So that's certainly the plan at this point to move forward with. And then water services, obviously, that has to do with the lead copper rules and things like that. Don't necessarily need to get into that, but basically we're going to update those services accordingly. And then storm sewer as well. Again, we don't have any big main storm sewer on this project, but this is basically taking what's probably 100-year-old storm sewer throughout most of it and just upgrading that. Again, smaller diameter stuff, but still important to do. The pavement, certainly looking at new pavement, new curb and gutters. Want to retain the element of on-street parking. Certainly upgrade pedestrian facilities where appropriate. Certainly take a good hard look at bike facilities. And there's options there that we'll talk about further. Trees, street trees. We'll talk about those more in detail as well, but that's an important aspect of the project. And then snow melt. I do have a slide here on snow melt that I'll share with you. Again, snow melt, I think we're going to be working on that probably, through October. But we've got at least a baseline for snow melt that we'd like to start out with. So in essence, we've got many different design options that we've considered that kind of include various degrees of those pieces and parts there. Getting back to the snow melt, so basically at this point, and I appreciate the slide doesn't do much in terms of where we're at, but I'll just describe it to you. That circle there is basically 10th Street between River and Central. So Centennial Park is to the south there. And so that's basically our baseline for snow melt. And when we talk about that, we're really not talking about snow melting the road as much as we're talking about snow melting the sidewalks there. So again, there's some elements that are already snow melted there, so we're going to be linking that all up together. So that's the baseline snow melt at this point. Okay, so some project background, and again, all this kind of funnels into our recommendation at the end. But basically, Why are we doing 10th Street? Well, so 10th Street's on our capital project list. It has been for several years. There's some MDOT requirements, and we've talked with MDOT on a few different occasions about what we can and can't do on the project. So that's good ingredients to have in the mix. We've got Hope College representation on the design team, which is great. Definitely want to put a plug out to Hope. We did that with 9th Street and some other projects that involve Hope College, and it's just great to have them as part of the team. So we do expect some input from them before the meeting on October 7, and we'll share that with everyone. There's certainly elements, particularly when we start talking about non-motorized, to the city energy plan and goals. We've got downtown traffic study that was recently completed that identified some non-motorized recommendations along 10th. We have a bike and pedestrian plan that's a little bit older, probably pushing 10 years now, that also recommended non-motorized on 10th Street. And then we have just connectivity. And this gets to what would an east-west corridor look like, and what could it potentially connect up. So there's a map here that I want to show you, but you start talking about all the different things that can get connected by putting the non-motorized element on this project, and just got a listing there. It does include other jurisdictions and through the township, and this goes back a few years, but there was a road safety audit on 8th Street that was done between Chicago Drive and Waverly Road, and I still know that there's interest in that, and so again, you'll see that on the map. Again, this brushes up to the Hope College campus. There's a few parks along the route, and then it does have some connectivity to the west with South Shore Drive and what have you. So again,
Brian,
yes.
sorry to interrupt, but I'm just going to jump in because I think a lot of people, we know all the time that people forget that, and I want to make it crystal clear, right, that A Street section from Chicago Drive to Waverly Road is not in the city.
Correct.
That's referred to as the federal district, and that's in Hollandshire Township. And you said it, but I really wanted to make a very clear point of that.
Sure, you bet. Okay, so let's cut to the chase then and get to the map. And again, we're just talking connectivity, right? And proximity to things like the transportation center, the bus depot there, what we've already built on Central Avenue there in red. We've got some improvements along Ottawa Avenue. Again, all these are non-motorized improvements, i.e. bike lanes that are out there. We've got them coming in from the west on South Shore Drive. And then certainly we have them to the east, although they're not marked. They certainly can be marked where we did do some connections up to that and connect to 8th Street over there by Paw Paw. So again, I just basically filled in all the blanks, if you will, to make that connectivity, to show that connectivity. And so we're talking about basically picking things up from South Shore Drive, getting things over to what would be the west end of our project. And then our project gets you over to Lincoln Avenue, and then again, as we talked about through that federal district between Chicago Drive and Waverly, there's certainly a possibility or potential for some non-motorized there too. So you can kind of see how that things start connecting up, and certainly that's why we're looking at 10th Street and giving it a good look for non-motorized, and that's why it popped up on all those studies too. So. Okay. Again, some background information for the project. You all recall PASER ratings, 0 to 10, 10 being a great brand new street, 0 being really bad street. We're in the poor category for 10th Street primarily overall, so it's due. Sidewalk condition, I love to give this plug because we just got done with sidewalk rating. And again, I would say we're in fair depending on where we're at. We do have some nice areas of sidewalk, but there are some that aren't in the best of shape. So obviously that's part of the detailed design where we'll go in and we'll make sure that we get everything in good shape sidewalk wise. And then as I mentioned before, with the storm sewer and some of those other utilities, they're just old. I mean, we're talking 100+ years here. And it's a great opportunity, again, with the funding and things like that, just to look at everything. So speaking of the funding, we did get award for 1.2 million in STP, Surface Transportation Funds, through a federal grant. Again, that was through the MAC, the McIntyre Area Coordinating Council. That's our local MPO. And basically, the questions come up in the past, and I want to address it right out here. The non-motorized element isn't necessarily required to secure or maintain that funding. So we could move ahead with the project without any non-motorized and not be in jeopardy of losing that grant funding. So we did clear that with the MAC, with the MPO, and that was the response there. I will say this, though, that part of our grant application included the notion that we would put some sort of put non-motorized improvements in there. That basically gave more weighting to our application, and I do think certainly made the application more competitive amongst our peers who are in the local metropolitan planning organization. So, to me, to proceed without any kind of non-motorized improvement, definitely I think we lose some credibility, maybe some street credit amongst our peers if we don't move forward with that element of the project in some shape or form. So with that, we'll move on. Project information. I just sprinkled some facts and figures in here. But these are all the supporting documents that we've done to try and help inform the decision, or at least the recommendation that we'd like to put forth to you tonight. We've done a parking study, fairly in-depth parking study, where folks have gone out and just counted certainly a baseline of available spaces, but then just the utilization of those through various times of the day, various days of the week, and various over the course of the last couple of months. Just various different situations to try and gauge utilization of that parking. So that's one thing. Overall, again, baseline for parking spaces on the whole of 10th Street is 271. And that's plus or minus, but pretty close. The street tree survey, similar thing. We had our consultant, who's a certified arborist, go through and basically all the street trees. And I'll show you what we're talking about in terms of street trees. But basically, those trees that are inside of the sidewalk, next to the roadway, between the sidewalk and the road, we've got 147 of those along 10th Street. And so we had our arborist go through and rate those, give it a condition rating. And as I've mentioned on other projects, oftentimes, just coming out of the gate, we understand that there's some trees in distress or that just need to be removed for various reasons. And so I'll talk about what that would entail as part of the design options. We did a crash analysis. Interestingly enough, and this is I think pretty unique to 10th Street, we did have on record 30 crashes involving parked vehicles. So that's kind of interesting. You don't normally see that, at least in the course of my career here. You don't see that many crashes involving parked vehicles on a street like 10th Street. It's pretty unique. Understand that there's the college campus there, which certainly contributed, but those crashes are spread out as well amongst the route. So something that definitely played into what we're preparing, or what we prepared in terms of a cross-section for you. The cycle track demo, again, we put a fair amount of effort into that demonstration. Appreciate everyone, whether you were for or against it, or happy with it, unhappy with it. Glad that everyone contributed and provided the input, because it's great. So wanted to definitely put a shout out to everybody for that. There was a total of 459 riders that utilized that over the 2-week trial. Traffic counts aren't anything unique really about that. Pretty standard with what we would expect on a street like 10th. Public input survey, I did want to just again throw out some numbers with regard to the public input, and I'll be quick about it. But we had about 200 total folks that shared with us their thoughts about the project. Non-city residents, There were 24 for and 7 against. And these can be available, right? So don't feel like you have to jot any of these down. But as far as city residents go, 57 for, 16 against. 10th Street residents, 3 for, 29 against. Hope College staff, 18 for, 25 against. Hope College students, 11 for, 9 against. And again, this can be made available should folks want to look at that. So the other thing that we've done and we're in the process of doing is just getting our sewer camera into our infrastructure. Granted, a lot of it's going to be replaced, but what we're looking for there is any kind of blind taps from folks' sump pumps and things like that. So again, all goes into what we want to do with the cross sections and the proposal here.
Are those videos going to be available for us too, Brian?
I'm going to hold off on the videos.
Okay, I just want
Yeah,
to clarify that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. They're trust me, they're not real exciting. So, okay, so cutting to the chase here, the cross sections considered. So what I'd like to do is these are the 6 different sections that we looked at. I've got a pictorial for each one, along with just some bullet points there. And we'll go ahead and basically, process of elimination, if you will, just kind of tick down the list here with what we're looking at. But basically, you can see the widths really play in, and those play into tree impacts and things like that. And so that's really the variation that we're seeing as we tick down the list. So the first option is basically a separated path. And I think what I'd like to do here is just take a quick minute and try and just document or make sure everyone's clear on the language and the terminology here. But basically, the sidewalk is nearest the right-of-way. Here, these are the right-of-way lines. And this, again, is a slice, if you will, of the street and the right-of-way as a whole. So you've got those pedestrian improvements on the outside edges. Then you've got what we refer to commonly as a parkway, but that's the grass, if you will, between the sidewalk and the curb. And then you've got the curbs, the street curbs, and then within that, the pavement. And so basically what we're trying to demonstrate here, and you see this a lot on the north side, is what they refer to as a separated bike path or a multi-use path or different things like that. But basically, it's typically a wider piece of infrastructure, typically 10 to 12 feet in width. And really for our given conditions here, with our parkways already mature with trees and things like that, we really think that this option is not feasible, just because whichever side you put it on, you're left with a very minimal parkway, and basically everything just gets affected. And so we really don't think that this separated bike path is an option on either side. So we're not recommending that. But again, a lot of folks are familiar with it. A lot of folks see it. But given our existing setup and what we have currently in the parkway, we really don't think it's appropriate to move forward with that. So the second one that we looked at was basically traffic lanes, parking on both sides, and a bike lane on both sides. We think that this is really too wide for most blocks. Again, getting into the tree impacts and things like that. However, there's a couple of blocks on either side of River, between Pine and River and between River and Central, that are already wide. And we think that this would be appropriate and not involve too many additional impacts by putting basically the whole kettle of fish, if you will, into the cross section. Again, not recommended for most blocks, but we do think that we could put that in next to River Avenue with minimal impacts. Okay, we'll keep going here. Third option, and again, not something that we're looking to recommend, but thought we would, let's go ahead and address it, is just maintaining the existing cross section. And one of the things, and again, it was a little bit surprising, I'll definitely say that, but with that crash pattern that we see with parked vehicles, we really think that the section as it stands right now is too narrow, and we feel that that is contributing to the crashes with the parked vehicles. And so what we'd like to do is basically, even if there isn't a non-motorized element, we think that this section is just too small and too narrow. The other thing that factors into this is with the desire to do the utility work and replace those old utilities, the curb and gutters are going to be coming out regardless of the cross-section we decide to move forward with. And so that lends itself to the opportunity, if you will, for us to look at changing the cross-section, even if it's just a little bit, to go ahead and address something like this crash pattern. So again, more to it as we go through these sections, but the utility work does play into it because just the proximity of that utility to the existing curb. You can't install that new utility without getting into the curb. So option 4, this is basically park.
Brian?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I just have one question. When you say crashes,
Yes.
and on a parked car, are those cars crashing into them or bikes crashing into them?
No, so there's
What's happening?
yeah, you bet. There's a total of 30 crashes that have been recorded that involve parked vehicles.
But-
So
But what's,
car to car.
so a car is coming around the corner or just driving into them?
So I have not reviewed all the UD10s, but I can only imagine all the different crash combinations that could
Okay.
be possible with
Cars,
that.
okay.
It's a pretty high number,
That's,
though.
okay, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
yes. There was, and again, just for reference, there was 2 bicycle crashes along the route. And again, the crash window that we looked at is a 5-year window, the last 5 years, which is pretty customary. So at any rate, again, with this option 4, basically putting back the attributes that are there now, no non-motorized, just parking in the traffic lanes, we would recommend that we bump that cross-section out a little bit to address that crash pattern, okay? Just to give folks a little bit of more wiggle room to navigate through there. Little narrower, yes, yeah, so the curbs would bump out a little bit. And basically, we're talking about 35 versus 37, so a foot on each side. So this option has limited impacts to trees. Basically, you're talking about 2 tree removals above baseline. And let me see, I actually forgot to address this, but with the existing cross-section, and again, this comes from the arborist report, there are 17 trees, and actually I believe that number is revised to 18, because I know we were looking at this just today. But there's 18 trees that have been flagged by the arborist as needing removal or in poor condition. So we would recommend that those go regardless of whichever cross-section we decide to go with. So just want to make that clear that that's coming from the arborist, not necessarily from staff here. But again, those address things like a diseased tree or, maybe there's a safety issue with a hollowed out trunk. I know I saw that on a couple of the notes there. So just wanted to make sure that we're clear on that. So this option, getting back to this, basically 2 trees beyond the 18, so a total of 20 tree removals. No non-motorized. It definitely maximizes the street parking, but we're not recommending that, again, primarily because of the lack of the non-motorized element. The 5th option we looked at, again, this is what we demoed with the cycle track. Do you think it would address the crash pattern? It definitely involves more impacts to trees, and I know that's a big number, but 102 tree removals out of the 147, and that's above baseline. So basically, there's a lot of tree impacts with that cycle track option. And again, it gets into the dimension there, 41 feet, that really starts picking up all those trees. So the the heartbreaking thing about this is that you've got this non-motorized feature that definitely appeals to all facets of users there with the bikes. And I saw it, I was out there riding it, and it was great to see. I just don't, it's hard to recommend that with that kind of impact to the trees. And so that really is, in essence, what led us to the final option. And what we're going to recommend is basically going with the bike lanes, maintaining on-street parking on one side. Again, we think we can get to the crash pattern, improve that. Limited impacts to the trees. There are 18 additional tree removals above the baseline of 18. However, only 2 of those trees are greater than 6-inch diameter. So this is really smaller trees, and I'll just share with you where they're at in front of First United Methodist Church, where we want to go a little bit wider with the cross section and have parking on both sides, and then also at the school at the Hope College campus on the east end between Lincoln and Columbia. That's where most of those 18 trees would be impacted. There's definitely a reduction in on-street parking because we're proposing to eliminate it on one side in specific blocks. So that amounts to approximately 99 spaces. I think that's probably a little on the heavy side. But the thing that I'd like to point out is from the utilization rate, when we did the traffic study, and this is really similar to what we did with Central Avenue, which has the same cross-section, but we looked at the utilization, how much is this parking really being used at any given day, at any given time. And particularly at the west end, we found the utilization rate to be on the low side. Obviously in the campus it's a little bit higher, but I do believe that there are additional parking facilities on the campus that may not be fully utilized. So at any rate, that's what we're talking about here in terms of the on-street parking. The non-motorized element is included. Again, one of the nice things about this option is we have seen it in service on Central Avenue. So it's a known quantity for us. And we'd like to recommend that for most blocks for 10th Street. So to get to the ultimate slide here, if you will, that option number 6 is basically the bike lanes with the parking on one side. And then the option number 2 on either side of River Avenue is basically the bike lanes with the parking on both sides. So the bike lane is continuous throughout, and then we're trying to maximize the parking where we can and where it makes the most sense. One thing that I'll point out, and I guess ask for your continued grace on this, is at the west end, that last block between Van Rolte and Washington, we're still looking at that. I think everyone can appreciate the geometry there at 10th Street and Van Rolte is not good for a crossing. And so we want to look at different options there, but also look at maybe different locations as well, where we want to try and encourage folks to make that crossing on Van Rolte. And I don't think, again, from a conceptual standpoint, we don't necessarily need to have that nailed down at this point. And in fact, I would say that given there's probably only a couple of different options we would go with there, that's something that we could even delay until quite late in the process. But I do think it deserves some additional thought, which we hope to have in the future, and certainly want to flesh out all possibilities there. So that's basically it in a nutshell on 10th Street, and I'm happy to answer any questions or comments.
Questions? Yeah, Quincy.
So I wanted to ask about some crash analysis. You said, and kind of ask what Nikki was asking as well, 30 parked cars, correct?
Correct.
You alluded to this a little bit. The time frame, is that the 5 years you were talking about?
Yes. So when we did the crash study, we looked back at 5 years worth of crash data. Now that crash data, we don't have any crash data for 20, right? It comes to us on a yearly basis. So this is basically 15 to 19. Those 5 years, right? 15, 16. Yeah, those 5 years.
Okay. I know you said you don't have the data behind that, but what about the dominant time frame? Like morning, evenings, or what would the time frame be? for
Yeah,
that?
so our traffic engineer did not flag anything, which tells me that there probably isn't a trend there, but that's something that we can look at.
Okay.
What that does is that requires us to go into the individual UD10s, the reports themselves, and just document that. And there was a fair amount, I think there was 57 total crashes here. 53 actually, sorry, 53 crashes, 57% of those involved parked vehicles. So, but we can get some more detail on time of day, just so that we have that.
All right, that would be good. I think that's kind of important as we just look at this. If they're at nighttime, that's a little different than 2 o'clock in the afternoon or even 6 o'clock in the evening. And I'm just thinking that time frame is when the bike path would be used the most in the evening time. So just correlating that time frame of use with the traffic or the accidents.
Yeah, Jay?
I think you've made some really good progress here, Brian, and you're thinking of what we were proposing here tonight. Couple questions. What, as it stands now, when this bike path runs into Vinralty Avenue, what will it hit? Another bike path? Is there anything there, or is it just that bike path ended and now you're
Yeah.
going where you want?
Yep, so the original intent or the thought with all these planning documents and things like that is that this is a connection with the park, with Collin Park. And so that was really the original intent, is let's find a way to get people to the park. And so that, I think, is certainly an element of it. But then when you look at connectivity, that is where you start looking at the possibility to connect up to existing facilities on South Shore. And how we specifically do that, Jay, along Vinralty or possibly some alternate routes, is something we need to spend a little more time on.
Yeah, and then when you go to Lincoln, it's just gonna dead end into Lincoln, this bike lane.
Yeah, and again, so that gets you out to DeVos. It potentially, again, if we put a facility there at Padnos at the transportation depot, right, then you've got some connectivity up Lincoln to that. And then also the idea of creating a facility through the federal district and making some connectivity there. So I would say that it's certainly not, to me, this is a piece of what would be a bigger non-motorized facility that would get us end to end,
Yeah.
basically.
So are there at all, we know when we're gonna do roads, we know when we're gonna, have you figured out when those blue dots are a reality?
To be determined, but I think that somewhat, at least for the facilities that are under our control, we have a 5-year plan, and we can decide what we want to put priority to at that point.
Well, just from a second ward perspective, I don't think we've been to too many coffees with council where this intersection, where 10th, 11th, 12th, with all this mostly pedestrian, run into Vinralty trying to access Collin Park. So we're adding to that now with this bike, if this bike lane thing flies, we're adding to that. And I'm not hearing you say we have a really good solution to that, we're gonna think about it. Now, I've been hearing us say, we're gonna think about it for a long, long time. And the last time we thought about it, we tried to do a little thing, but as often as I walk there, that's not working.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd feel a heck of a lot better if I had some idea, and the people of the second ward who walk that all the time and complain to me all the time.
Yeah.
What element are we gonna add to this, rather than say, we gotta think about that, now that we've added a bike path. We've had to think about that for a long time. And to me, that's one of the most priority, that's a higher priority than this bike lane. So,
Yeah, yeah, and let me just share with you some of the challenges with 10th and Van Raalte in particular.
Yep,
So when you look at the possibility of like a raised median or something like that, right, to basically cut that crossing in half so you have a refuge in the middle.
yep,
With the presence of the parade route, that enters in a little bit of complexity to the degree to which we can do that. And so, again, I would love to be able to say we could do something like that, but I think that other elements like the parade route have to be taken into consideration. And so, again, the geometry is not going to change, or at least not in the foreseeable future. So I think that's where we look at, okay, maybe we just need to try and encourage folks to cross at a different location.
And more specifically, Brian, that's where that dotted box really suggests that one of the locations that we're looking at more is at 11th and Van Raalte. And that has the additional advantage of Collin Park putting some type of a connecting bike facility along Collin Park to connect to what's already on South Shore is probably pretty workable along Collin Park. And certainly we think that there's much greater, the geometry, as Brian would say, is much better at 11th and Van Raalte. So,
well, I live on 11th. I walk across Van Raalte all the time. It gives you about 2 more seconds to respond to a car when you're crossing the street, coming around that curve. So whether it's 10th or 11th, I don't think that makes a difference. To me, it's more about, I don't know in our traffic study if there's a bigger picture about rerouting traffic completely so that we don't have this problem. But if we don't, why we can't consider some kind of a pedestrian crossing there? Something like they have at Hope College, slow traffic down around that corner. We're encouraging all of these people to go down these roads close to that curve, and I'm telling you, it's a matter of time. And I hear it all the time. We've all heard that that's an issue. So it seems like I'd really like to see a little more thought into that before we vote on whether or not this bike lane is going to bring more people down there and just kind of put a terminus there.
Sure.
I'd like to have more confidence that, in fact, that is going to be part of this project.
Yeah, and we, trust me, we've looked at it quite a few different ways.
Yeah.
In fact, just received some correspondence today, additional correspondence from the traffic engineer who basically, again, sought some input from different set of eyes, basically, looking at it. So we're going into 3 and 4 different iterations trying to figure out, okay, what would really work and what wouldn't. And just say that we really haven't come up with any kind of a consensus solution at this point.
Yeah, and please don't know that I know how you've been thinking about that.
Right.
It's just, it keeps talking and keeps talking, and
Yep.
I know we've all worked hard on it, but now it just seems like this is bringing that conversation to the fore again with a little more emphasis, so.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Yes, Lynn?
Yeah, and it seems like, just to follow up on what Jay was saying, it seems like if you're putting a bike lane on 10th Street, then we're automatically shifting our vision to connecting to Collin Park to 10th Street, which I think we've all indicated is not ideal. So my next thought is, or something else that I was thinking about, was that when you're on Maple, the difference between 10th Street West and 10th Street East is significant. Like it's almost like they're just 2 different areas of that street, and I can see where a bike lane going east would make a whole lot of sense. West, it just feels like an entirely different setup, and so I'm wondering. I know I hate to, like redesign in my mind, but as I'm thinking about biking, it doesn't make sense to come from Van Raalte through on 10th Street, which seems like I mean, I know you're gonna expand it, but, some of the other streets, 11th in particular, 12th Street, it seems like it makes way more sense, because that's where you'll, ideally put a crosswalk, come up to Maple where it's wider, and then take 10th Street where there are fewer houses, significantly fewer houses from Maple to Lincoln.
Yeah, and I think, again, whether you land on 10th Street, 11th Street, 12th Street, I think it's the same set of criteria. You know, those blocks between Van Raalte and Maple, I think share a lot of the same characteristics, no matter which numbered street you're on. And so I don't necessarily know if you'd be gaining a whole lot by doing that, other than obviously before getting to Van Raalte, directing that traffic up to 11th.
Well, I think that,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's important, but I also, I was also surprised when you said that the west end street parking was low.
Yes.
Because that has not been my experience.
Yeah, and again, we've got numbers here that show utilization in the teens in terms of percentage. I can just, let's appreciate the fact that we're in the world of COVID, right? So in terms of events and things like that at the park, those have been obviously reduced. So again, you think under normal conditions, these numbers would come up a little bit, but I still think, again, it's more event-driven probably than anything else, you know, so we're seeing kind of a baseline here.
Okay. I'd be interested to know if 12th Street is significantly lower than 10th, because 12th Street, I think they've got longer driveways. Many of the houses on 12th Street also have larger garages. And I'm thinking between Washington and River.
Maple, oh, okay,
But
yeah,
even
right.
Washington and Maple,
Right.
for sure, or
Yep.
Washington and Pine. So it
Mhm.
does seem like it's a different dynamic, a
Mhm.
different neighborhood dynamic, where on-street parking on 10th Street might be more utilized. But anyway, I think my main point is just that it feels as though bike lanes going east from Maple would make a whole lot more sense than going west,
Mhm.
and that you could come up a different street.
Got it.
Dave?
Yeah, let me take a moment to perhaps state what's obvious. First of all, I'm a big proponent of non-motorized facilities. Living on Central Avenue, I've had the opportunity to observe what that can look like, and I'm here to say that if you build it, they will use it. There's been a significant increase in bicycle traffic on Central Avenue. It's a little bit inconvenient from time to time not to be able to park on both sides, but we've adjusted and it's cool. If you compare what the systems that we have to more established systems, particularly European, particularly the Netherlands, which I'm most familiar with, the disadvantage that we have is that their systems have had a lot more time to develop, and their roadways have been embedded into their infrastructure. It's, for the most part, motorized traffic, bicycle traffic, pedestrian traffic, typically with very little separation. And woe to you if you get in the wrong lane, because you'll be killed. What we're looking at here is trying to develop that sort of scenario, maybe not to that level, but we're trying to, as we have done on Central Avenue, create these uniquely different pathways. And that obviously involves reconstruction and getting rid of some stuff that we've been used to, like trees and parkways and that sort of thing, in order just to create the space to make these things happen. So I've thought about it too, you know, maybe 10th Street's not the right street, maybe we should go look at another one, but we deal with, you know, windows of opportunity. When will we be redeveloping any of these other streets, like we will be developing 10th Street? So that always plays into, as long as I've been around here, plays into when and how we do these things. I just want to ask one question, Brian, to clarify You said the baseline tree removal was, if we kept the existing cross-section, was about 18 trees?
Yeah, yes.
And the worst-case scenario, we would be eliminating an additional 102,
Correct.
but with the recommended option 6, it looks like total, we would be losing about 36 trees.
Correct.
So my math is good.
Yes.
Oh,
And again,
hallelujah.
let me just take the opportunity too to reiterate, half of those trees are not in good condition, have been evaluated as poor condition. I really think, and a gentleman from Hope College who's on the team actually offered this, and I think it's appropriate. If we look at it as an opportunity, and I think you all know I brought a lot of different tree projects to the council that we typically do after the project, and certainly this would be no exception. We would plan to plant new trees, and again, vary the species, vary the age of the trees, and I think just provide a healthier streetscape, if you will, for the whole route. And we've done that in the past with prior projects, certainly would expect to do that with this project. And again, non-motorized or not, we would plan to do that.
One more question. With the recommended option 6, the dedicated bike lane, would that be in the north or the south?
Yes, so the parking would be on the north.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's significant, I think, and thank you for that. And thank you for all your work, because this
Yeah,
is
thanks.
major stuff. That would be significant around Hope College, as I observed there. A lot of the life-threatening situations that happen are students walking between cars, because you have parking on both sides of the street. And certainly this scenario would, it would change the way people live and where they park and that sort of thing, and that's where collaboration with Hope, I hope, no pun intended, would come into play there. I guess the main point that comes to my mind I'd like to make is that, if we want to live into the visions that we've had over a number of years of creating non-motorized pathways and ways of people to get back and forth around town, and how that influences quality of life and all that stuff, that's going to come at a price. And I guess what we're looking at here is how high a price do we want to pay? When can we do what we can do in the most economical and reasonable way? The recommendation, and this is the first time I've seen it, but the recommendation that you're offering seems to me to be a good compromise, both in providing those things that we've said over and over that we want to provide for this community, that being non-motorized opportunities for people to get around, and still trying to make life as convenient as we can for the stuff that we do. This seems to be a pretty good option to me. But let no one be deceived. It's going to be a little inconvenient, both in the construction and as we live into what it looks like. But life is compromised, so that's it.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else? Yes, Quincy.
So there's been a lot of talk about moving, possibly looking at other streets, 11th and 12th. What went into deciding, what was the criteria for deciding that we would look at 10th Street? I don't know if you guys covered that earlier on or not.
Yep, and so there's some studies that were done. The downtown traffic study identified 10th Street. Our own bike and pedestrian plan identified 10th Street. And again, when you look at the map and the connectivity and the proximity to downtown, it all kind of lends itself to 10th Street. Albeit, again, a challenge, as Jay and Lynn, you can appreciate. I mean, there's definitely a challenge at Van Raalte. Yep.
Anyone else?
And I'll add to that, Quincy, just Dave said it well, where you have a window of opportunity. So we knew that 10th, we're reconstructing the entire stretch, right? So it lends itself to that. And I think one of the earlier commenters talked about 10th is the only one of the mentioned streets that goes the entire stretch that we're talking about. So the other numbered streets that we've talked about, you'd have to make multiple jogs because it is interrupted, if you would, by the Hope campus.
Nikki?
Okay, I really want to like this, but I have a lot of questions. And I really like coming from the suburbs where I live out in the west and at the pickle factory and coming all the way through on a bike path. So the connectivity, I understand and I like. I think, because it ends at Collin Park, and then I keep thinking maybe you could curve around to the 9th Street there. But I don't know, and I appreciate Councilman Hoekstra's comment about windows of opportunity, so I'm trying to get into that. It's a great idea. I think 10th Street is just odd. Are these bicyclists, are they bikers, like, the people in the gear, or are they people like me who, have a upright bike? Or who's using this exactly? Both? Three-wheelers, yeah. I don't have a three-wheeler.
Right.
But is it, because some are going faster
Sure.
and some aren't.
Yep.
And so are they using the same lanes?
Yeah, and I would say it's certainly available to any of the bikers. I think probably the more experienced folks will get out there on the bike lanes.
Experienced, okay.
And again, that speaks to that cycle track. What was so attractive with that cycle track option is that you saw kind of a wider variety of users there. Again, the trade-off though for the impacts to the trees, I think is just a pretty high hill to climb in order to move forward with that. And I would defer to Dave too, to some extent with Central Avenue, although every time I go down Central a fair amount coming between the transportation office and City Hall. And it does vary, but I do typically see somebody on Central or State Street. It's typically a more experienced rider, though. I don't see kids out there in a bike lane per se.
Okay. I just think there's so many, Holland's the best city in the United States to live. We keep disrupting these neighborhoods, though. You have 29 versus 3 people on the street who don't want it. They have their parking. They might have 4 drivers in the house, and they will lose their parking. The trees, that's huge. Are we replacing the trees?
Yeah, the idea, and again, we want to maintain an element of parking, as we did on Central Avenue, and we want to minimize the trees. And certainly, we would replace any trees that we take out, but I would offer that we would put even more back in. So.
Because there are home values, and there's an ambiance to, of course,
And we appreciate
a
that.
neighborhood.
Yes.
Okay, that's all for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jay?
The parking question, would that be seasonal? That you can't park on both sides of the street on 10th Street? Like from November to March, there's some added benefit because, again, these are some of the most dense housing, smallest lots in the city. And just wondering, no sense in having that be year-round, right?
So let's talk about that. Are we talking? Yeah, the idea is it's year round. Are you getting at the overnight?
No.
Scenario? Okay.
During the
Yeah,
day.
no, this would be year round.
So you couldn't park on the north side of the street year-round?
You could.
You could?
That's where the parking facility, the on-street parking facility, would be on the north side.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, south side.
Yeah, so you could not on the south side, correct? Very similar to Central Avenue, where that parking's on the west side, and there's no parking on the east side. Same thing, just laid east-west.
Will this be available? I mean, I thought I knew, having biked it and ridden this area, I'm not, and I've certainly been on Central, but not looking at that specifically. Will this information be available and then give me a chance to look at it in thinking more about this?
Sure, yeah. So is there specific, like what?
The 6.
Yeah.
And then
right.
the map.
Sure.
And I just to
Yeah.
go over it, I'm
Yeah,
slow
this
that way.
PowerPoint,
Yeah.
Attachments that he's shown, anything else that you'd ask for, we'd put out there. The nice thing, I didn't mention this at the beginning, just sometimes you get lucky with how meetings fall too. Obviously, you can't make a decision tonight. We're not
Correct.
looking for a decision tonight.
Correct.
Again, we're not looking for final design, but we're looking for that conceptual design where we're moving forward. And you have 2 weeks until October 7, where yes, we are looking for, we'd want to vote on October 7 so we know how to proceed.
Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm trying to balance this equation of the people who want to use their bicycles in the city, but then also the disruption it's going to cause the neighbors. And there's a significant amount of disruption that's going to cause the neighbors. We only had 450 bikers from all over the place, not just this neighborhood, from everywhere, coming to enjoy this temporary bike lane that's been established. So I'm not sure if it's a reflection of the people who live in that area. And I want to really take their thoughts into consideration here. But, you know, we're looking at 99 parking spots that we were going to lose. So how does that equate to the number of people or residents who live on that block? Is there 99 homes? Does that mean one car per home has got to find another place to park? And when we already have high density issues, and my goodness, after Udo, I mean, we may even have higher density issues. So I guess I would wonder how disruptive that's going to become. So then, but also we keep, you know, I think this fallacy that somehow we're going to have less cars because we have more bikes. We're going to have different cars in the future. I think there are going to be different cars, but there's still going to be cars. And people are still going to want to travel out of the city and into the city. They have work, they have play, they have recreation. I mean, there's all those things. So I'm really toiling with this disruption that we're talking about here. I'm all for reconstructing this road and using the funds appropriately to do that, especially the public utilities. But I'm just kind of toil with this disruption. And not only short-term disruption, I'm talking, this is long-term disruption. Let's return the bike path back to parking. And then I look at, when you mentioned Hope College played a role in this, and individuals at Hope College participated in this process, but yet almost half of the people that we surveyed at Hope College didn't like it. Why? There had to be some comments why they didn't like it. And my assumption is that because they rent down there, they use the parking spaces to travel to and from. Just guessing. So I'm just wondering why, you know, unless you have the answer, why there were so many people not liking.
You bet. And I should clarify that survey and the kind of the for and against, the yays, the nays, was respective of the cycle track, not necessarily non-motorized or a bike lane, if you will, but it definitely was zeroed in on the demo and the cycle track. So let's not, I don't think we should necessarily lump everything into that.
So
And
then
we do know that Hope officially, sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
that's right.
Hope will officially give us a position as the institution prior to the October 7 decision that you make.
Appreciate that. So lastly, I think it's lastly, but if you go back to the potential different
Yeah.
connectivity, maybe you said it, but maybe I didn't see it, but nothing going to the south.
Yeah, so there's,
Are we just assuming that Washington and River is going to become that south corridor connectivity point?
Central, yeah, so Central Avenue has the facilities on it. And again, that's where, you know, that cross-section, if you go anywhere south of 12th on Central, you'll see that cross-section.
The red line right down the middle.
Yeah, which is, that's Central. There we go, okay.
Central,
So
yeah.
I wasn't seeing it. I thought that was River and Washington, so thank you.
Yeah, got it, Central, yep.
What we didn't put in there either, Brian, where maybe in a future version we can put in there, we also have the Macatawa Greenway. I don't think is that overlaid on this?
Yeah, no, so the.
Some of it's represented, but like at Lincoln, isn't it Lincoln where it actually goes south and then goes across?
Yeah, I think it'd be good for us we can add that, as well as the US bike route on here
Yeah.
as well. I think we can fill this map in a little bit more too.
Yeah, and I guess last, you know, we talked about 30 accidents over the last 5 years, correct? I heard you correctly, but
Yep.
in that 3 bicycle accidents.
Two,
Two
yes.
bicycle accidents in
Yep.
5 years. Bicycles have this unique access that cars don't. They can ride on sidewalks, they can ride on the road, they can ride on streets. They don't even have to be licensed or insured, but they can go just about anywhere. They can ride through the grass. So I'm just wondering what problem we're trying to solve. People ride on that, they're looking at 6 blocks here in the city of Holland, but they gotta get here somehow with that bike. So they're gonna be riding down some very busy streets and roads, and they do it anyways with due caution, wear helmets, they obey traffic laws. So I'm just trying to figure out what we're trying to accomplish with this. So I'm just, in my own head, I would hope that I can be more convinced of why this is necessary for the disruption it's gonna cause.
Sure, and I can appreciate that. And again, I just go back to the documents that are, that I referenced, the planning documents. And again, it's really a decision, right? Do we want to follow those or maybe go off in a different direction? So, yeah.
And-
Nikki?
Oh, yeah, and as I think of between what Scott said and what Jay said, as we come from the south, from Collin Park and squirrel around Boat Works and kind of up there to get to Farmers Market, the biggest difficulty is crossing the street. We can bike on the sidewalk. It's my granddaughter, and but you can't. It's hard to get across 8th Street coming to Collin Park. Is that 8th Street? Yeah, and then 9th Street going east. It's hard. The crossings are difficult. And the crossings are difficult everywhere that a bike user, whenever a biker crosses, whether it's a river, and that was one thing with this bike track, River and 10th Street was difficult for a driver to cross. And so you've got, and I think that will always be so, and how many accidents we have, that's a very good question to say, what problem are we trying to solve? And there's that balance, disrupting a neighborhood or making it easy to use bicycles. We all use bicycles anyhow, so thank you.
Raul?
So obviously the bike lane on 10th Street isn't a new idea because it's been part of these planning documents that we referred to already. But I do think that the demo was pretty informative, right? I mean, it was telling in a number of different ways, and maybe for some in the affirmative, for others definitely in the opposite. And I think I agree with just about every sentiment and every perspective and question and comment that my peers have shared, because I think it is complex. There are a lot of facets that we need to be considering, and looking at the recommendations or the potential options. I think the combination of the 6 and the 2 recommendation is probably the best out of those. So like it's beginning to make a little sense. I think at the end of the day, I still want to understand a little bit more of, yes, that question, what problem are we trying to solve? And I have a little bit of personal experience just having driven through there in my car. I live 3 blocks, 5 blocks from there, right near Veneralty as well. So I frequent that space. Lynn, you're right there too. And the kind of cross traffic, that happens and the near misses just driving, without this demo, it's often down Washington. And during this bike demo, there were plenty of bikes that were just riding past, no awareness of any stop signs. So that concerns me, right? There's a number of things where, is this causing a problem that we're not anticipating, that we haven't really vetted, right? And are we really fixing something that's currently broken, or creating an opportunity, right? So that's kind of one thing. So I really want to understand, what are the disruptions going to be, and is that worth the investment? But there is, right? To Dave's point, there is a window of opportunity right here. So if we're going to do it, this is kind of the time to do it. But if not, well then, are we willing to let that go? Because the cost of doing it later is not going to be, right? It's not going to be worth doing at that point. So yeah. So I understand that it is complex. I did have some other questions about the 30 crashes. Just my mind as I'm kind of informing what this looks like, and the potential impact where those 30 crashes kind of spaced out along the length of that. Just kind of I want to see it visually.
Sure.
if that's accessible. Out of the 200 public comments, you know, how many of those were from residents who live on 10th Street, who experience that road regularly? I've been driving it, you know, 2-3 times this week, or a day this week, because of the construction on 7th Street. And so 10th Street has become my corridor on the way home to avoid some of the traffic. And don't start using it. That's mine. That's mine. No. But it is, I mean, there's a lot of parked cars out there. I mean, it is still somewhat of a busy road. I mean, when I was driving it, and maybe it's because of traffic. I don't think so. Because those cars, you know, I'm sure they were parking there anyways. So I think the public comments, so because you did provide, you know, a breakdown, and it does seem like, you know, the for and against was pretty marginal. I mean, it is a tough call when you're looking at it in some of the breakdown that you gave. But I think the one number that I am interested in is how many of those in the affirmative or against were on the street, you know, from residents who live there or in close proximity. Like that's an important number for me. So that's all.
Thanks, Raul. Yeah, Lynn?
Could you tell me again how, for option 6, how much wider the street will need to be? How much you're proposing? I can't remember.
So yeah, option 6
Yeah.
is gonna be 38, I believe. Let's just
So an
check.
additional 3 feet. Yeah.
Yes, 38, so we're talking 1.5 feet on either side.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you mentioned that the additional 18 above the ones that will need to be removed are kind of down in
Yes,
front of FUMC and then Hope College?
Yes.
And the other ones then I assume are west of Maple?
yes.
And do you,
I think there's 2, maybe 1.
west of Maple?
Yes.
Oh, so the entire 36 are, east of
Let me, the 18, so the 30, again, when I look at this, I divide that 36 into the 18 that the arborist said no matter what. Those are sprinkled throughout.
okay.
But out of the 18 that are cross-section related, if you will, to me, I think all but 2 are in those 2 areas by the church and by the college.
I kind of wanted to get a sense of where, when you're saying sprinkled throughout, it would be
Yeah,
really
yeah.
nice to know exactly where, I mean, I don't know if you can map that out. but it
Yeah,
would be nice
and,
to know.
yes. You bet.
Anyone else? Yeah, I've got just a couple of comments to make. First, I really appreciate this group because to echo what some of the other council members have said, the comments that have been made here are ones that have been bouncing around in my head in regard to this, and I'm really glad that we've got 2 weeks to be thinking about this before we're going to be asked to make a decision on it. I do want to congratulate you, Brian, on the hard work that you and your team have done on this, and also in including Hope College in this process. Because when, you know, what Scott talks about, is there a problem that we're looking to solve? 10th Street through Hope College with parking on both sides
Yeah.
is a problem that needs to be solved. I was a student there. I was an adjunct faculty for a semester there. That's a difficult couple of blocks to be able to navigate, and we need to figure out something to make that work better for all of the folks that are there. I really liked the cycle track the week that it was up there. I was really excited about it. That felt really good. It felt good to be able to ride it. It felt good to be able to drive through that. My concern was exactly what I saw with the numbers here on this, that 102 trees just is untenable in a number to be thinking about in that regard. And so I started thinking about what are the compromise things here, and what I want to make sure that we're not doing. Because when you compromise, sometimes you end up with the worst of both of those options rather than the best of both of those options. I think that we're falling toward the better side of that rather than the worst. I don't think that that the proposal that you put here is so watered down that nobody's going to want to use it. I think that what Dave said is true. If you build it, they will come. And one of the things that's bouncing in my head is, are we living into what we say that we want to do? When we have said over and over again, we want to try to increase non-motorized options for our residents, that when we have the opportunity, we need to do that. I also, Nikki, I happen to live near you and work near you, and I do ride through this route pretty frequently. I used to be one of those people with the skinny tire bike and the tight shorts and the helmet that was going flying through there, and I never would have thought, I'm not anymore, Scott, thank goodness. I never would have considered this as an option, you know, when I was zipping along at 25 to 30 miles an hour. Yes, back in the day when I was doing that. I have now moved into that second stage that we were joking about back here. I've got one of those big fat tire bikes, which ties into, Jay, what you were saying is, I think what you were getting at is who would use this in the winter. I'm able to ride my fat tire bike year-round, and sometimes snow is the most fun time to be able to ride that. And I see myself on my way to that three-wheel bike that you were joking about, Scott, as well. But when I'm riding from my house over or into the Central Park area and wanting to get to Windmill Island, this section is one of the most treacherous sections to try to navigate, because I can work my way around by Hines and around through Collin Park, and then I'm left with not a lot of great options to get from there to the other side of downtown. I find myself going, well, can I make my way kind of down 9th or through 8th? And I can't cut through the Civic Center. I can't cut down 8th by the Civic Center because that's blocked off now. So I got to move over into the traffic lane on 9th Street, and I got to try to find my way in those 3 different lanes of one-way traffic on 9th Street to get all the way down to Lincoln, where I do pick up, and then head back out onto Windmill Island and come back around. So this would be a great opportunity for the part of the city that is south and west of Collin Park to be able to connect to that other portion of the city that's there. And so there is a problem that I do think that we need to be thinking about there. But the question is, are we asking too much of the neighbors that are here? Again, goes back to that 2 weeks that I'm really glad we have the opportunity to be able to think about this. One of the questions and the other things that's been bouncing around in my head that it really boils down to is, of these plans, one of the things that I was concerned about when we looked at the cycle track and we looked at some permanent options for cycling in there is, if we find that we've made a mistake, how hard is it to go back to where we were? And the way I'm looking at the cross-section that you have here is that if we get a year or two down the road with this and we go, people aren't using it, or gee, we've created a problem with more accidents there rather than fewer accidents there, or we really did need those 99 parking spaces that we asked the neighborhood to give up. How difficult would it be? Are we looking at just repainting lines? Are we looking at moving curb and gutter? Because when I looked at those cross sections, I thought that those were fairly similar.
Yeah, and so, again, I would encourage you to drive or spend some time on Central Avenue.
Yep.
And just take a look at that, because the end treatments as we go from block to block are designed in such a way that really lend itself to the section.
On the parking side, because I deliberately drove it tonight.
Right. And so that wouldn't necessarily lend itself to, there'd have to be some rework there at the end treatments.
So it's not, it wouldn't, going back on this would not be as easy as, we could just repaint some lines?
It would not, no.
Okay.
No.
Well,
Okay.
and isn't Central's a different street? I mean, it is a thoroughfare of a sort, as opposed to 10th Street's just a neighborhood street. So I think those are 2 different types of streets. A neighborhood in of itself, or Central, I mean, I know you don't, but it's wider, isn't it wider? I mean, or does it just seem wider than 10th?
Yeah, I would say, Dave would say it was probably a neighborhood, and it's probably more similar
Yeah,
than
you know,
what
and
the
I
final would be.
can do some comparisons too on like traffic counts, but I think you'll find that it's pretty similar.
Okay, well, this is the homework you were talking
Mhm.
about. I hadn't thought of Central, and I thought I knew what I was talking about even with this, but, neighborhoods are important, and we keep disrupting, and I want to make sure that it isn't a disruption and 2 years later, we say, we created a monster. It's just other people, it's just bikers wanting to bike for recreation. It's not, we want to encourage people biking versus driving all the time. But are people going to be doing that, going to work on their bikes, or are people just from out of town coming through just for fun, which is okay.
I think,
That's
yeah.
why we have trailways and whatnot, the Macatella.
I think you'd likely see a combination of that, of people choosing to ride their bikes to work, but also then those those cycling groups that may be leaving out from the bike shops in the areas downtown where they're meeting, getting themselves out into the more country roads, but they gotta get through the city somehow to be able to do that. And so I know there's a group that does a Tuesday night ride that, if you're in the right spot on Tuesday night, there are these, there's the A group, the B group, and the C group that comes through. They need a way to be able to get through as well. So, yeah, Keith.
So I think we're wrapping up. I don't mean to make this be the last comment, but maybe to state the obvious. We felt it was, like I said in the introduction, that we needed to come forward and at least make a recommendation, so we did. I think what you'll hear, though, is that we realize, and stating the obvious again, where a lot of the questions and conversation that you had tonight was great, and there's some things that we can answer, right? It's like a factual. But I would say the vast majority of the questions that you're asking, we're not going to have an answer for, right? Because there's not an answer to it. And not to make light of it, but that's why you guys get paid, and you're sitting in the seats that you are. Because it is a trade-off of those types of things. And these come around periodically. And this is absolutely one of those trade-off type of things where when you put something like this through a neighborhood, wherever you'd put it, yeah, it does have a sense of disruption, Nikki. So not to kind of plop that all in your laps at the end, but that's the reality this is one of those projects.
Mike?
Yes, I'm sorry, it's very unusual to speak after the mayor, and Mika, I want you to close your ears for the question I'm gonna ask. We've got a little bit of redundancy going on here, and I'm just wondering if we're going to abandon the bike path that we have on 9th Street from River to Columbia.
Yeah, no, I would not say that would be the case. And again, I think with 9th Street, there has some connectivity there up to Lincoln and up to the depot, and that certainly was what we were thinking as part of 9th Street. The other thing too, though, is again, call it a bike lane, call it shy distance between the parked cars and the travel lane. But really, it's multifunctional there, I think, on 9th Street. There were some factors that went into that as well with regard to busing and how the buses function along 9th Street that dictated where we put that. But,
And I fully understand that, Brian, and
Yep.
I was not in favor of it at that time because I hate the idea of passenger doors opening into a car. Or I'm sorry, into somebody going down the road, and that's one of the reasons I'm asking that question.
Sure.
What you're proposing here eliminates that and makes it much safer for the bikes because there's no vehicular parking stop, whatever, except for people coming out of driveways, which no matter what you do, you're never gonna solve that, but.
That's on one side, yes. On the
So-
curbs, right.
Yeah, putting the bike lane on the same side as the parked cars. And I know we've tried that, I know you've had success with that, but it's always bothered me. And unfortunately, my experience has been, a lot of people are not using that bike path. They're actually in the south lane going down 9th Street, which, especially when you get into the bump outs there by the Hayworth Center, gets a little dicey.
It's a harrowing experience, just from somebody who's used it quite often. Either side of it, that's not a great option for somebody on a bike.
Just an observation.
Yep.
Sorry, Mika.
Anyone else? This is why we get paid the big money. Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Next item, Centennial Park Master Planning Process and Update. Mr. Van Beek. Yeah.
I almost said it.
All right.
Right at 6:45.
Thank you for your time management, sir. This is a fun one, and I'm going to get out of the way quickly, but again, kudos to staff, kudos to some subcommittees of some of our committees. What you're going to find tonight on this subject is it's really more about Centennial Park and a process that we think we want to enter into there. and that it has the nice side effect, I think, of potentially leading us to the ongoing search for a solution as it relates to the greenhouse further down the road. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. Andy's going to initiate it, and I think Phil Meyer is going to bring it home.
Correct.
All right, thanks, Andy. And Phil and Mark was very critical to these conversations also.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me tonight. It's been a while since I've been here, so it's nice to be back. As Keith said, this is kind of a little update on where we're at with Centennial Park, and a brief update on the greenhouse as well. As you will recall, we started a charrette process back in February, pre-COVID, and we got through a process of what we're kind of doing with the greenhouse, where we may go with it, and the like. Out of that conversation came the idea, actually it was even previous before that, but out of that particular charrette, it was determined that Centennial Park really needed some additional planning and a management plan to go along with it. It's a unique park in a unique spot, and it lands within a historic district, so the Historic District Commission has some oversight in that park, as well as the Parks and Rec Department and Commission as well. So throughout the charrette process, we decided we would look at doing a master plan for Centennial Park and what that would look like. And so after the charrette was done, we had plans to meet relatively quickly after that, and that went to the wayside all summer long. And about a month ago, our two commissions met and had a big discussion about the greenhouse, and then in particular about Centennial Park. As I mentioned, there isn't an existing master plan for that park. We have a 5-year master plan that oversees and kind of overlaps all the parks within the city, but we don't have anything that is a specific plan for a specific park. So at this August 17th meeting we met, had great discussions about all of those things, and both commissions believe that we really need to look at doing a master plan for Centennial. And in fact, that will help drive, as Keith mentioned, the conversation about what we do with the greenhouse. As Phil will mention in a few minutes, we looked at a few different locations for a landing spot, for the potential landing spot for the greenhouse, and Centennial Park was mentioned in that conversation. But we thought it would be very premature for us to put the cart before the horse and put the greenhouse in a place that it may not be appropriate to be there. So what we're recommending, and Phil has done a tremendous amount of work on this, in fact has drafted an RFP to go out for a master plan for Centennial. We would hire a consultant to come in, and it would be a relatively quick process. It's a small park, but there is a lot of uniqueness to it. Like I mentioned, the historic aspect of it, as well as the Victorian landscaping in the park. We would ask them to come in, do a quick master plan or management plan for us, and we would adopt that, look at their recommendations, and then go forward with their recommendation in terms of the greenhouse and see if it's an appropriate spot to put it. We don't have any funds for this master plan process right now. However, I think I could talk to Matt and we could find some money to do this. We think it'd probably be somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 ish. We don't know without getting the RFP back, but it shouldn't be very expensive. It'll be quick, and we'll go from there. We had a great, Phil can attest to this too, but we had great meetings with the two commissions. It was wonderful to see the two groups work together on this, and I think it was an awesome collaborative effort. So,
Questions for Andy? Great, thanks, Andy.
good. I'll turn it over to Phil. Thanks, Phil, and really appreciate his due diligence on this and hard work. It's been great working with him again.
And if there are slides there, the clicker's right there.
Yeah, they're right here.
Good evening, everyone. If Andy's not been here in a while, I've not been here in a longer while, so it's great to be back. I am just going to focus on the workshops that we had. As Andy suggested, there was a lot of work done. There was a greenhouse working group that we called it, which was comprised of representatives from both the Parks and Rec Commission as well as the Historic District Commission. And there were staff from Parks and Community and Neighborhood Services involved, and we had consultants, Haryi Khan and GMB, two folks from GMB, Dan Tyrer and Nate Bosch were involved in it as well. It was a great, probably a day and a half or so effort. The committee Let's see if I can get a slide on here. Well, there's the list of the committee members. The committee met the first afternoon and did a tour of a number of sites that we pre-identified as possible locations for the greenhouse, all public sites, publicly owned sites. And then in the evening, there was an open house, and we asked for comments from the community on what their thoughts are on different sites, what their thoughts are on the greenhouse itself, and covered a lot of ground with that group. We went through a process that probably identified 8 to 10 different sites by the time we left that evening session. And then during the course of the next day, we winnowed that down to 6. And those are included Centennial Park, Window on the Waterfront, Windmill Island, Civic Center, Van Rolte Farm, and Collin Park. And some of those parks had multiple locations. That was sort of the 6 we then spent more time talking about and exploring with the team. Ended up with sort of the top 3 candidates that we thought made the most sense, and they vary quite a bit in terms of what each one of those offers. That would be Centennial Park, Civic Center, and Window on the Waterfront. Now I've brought my favorite 75 slides here to share with you on these, but
Thank you for narrowing it down to those favorites.
Yeah, I was going to say, Phil, if you say that, you may not visit this group again anytime soon. Just kidding.
80 slides? Sorry. Centennial Park really rose to the top for a variety of reasons. I think it was the preferred park from the Parks Department perspective. It has the most direct historical link to the greenhouses. The greenhouses were built in order to service Centennial Park at the Centennial, or just after the Centennial. There were 2 locations in the park that were identified. This is on the south end of the park. City Hall's on the left-hand side in this slide. So there was a location at the south end of the park that could look something like that, where a portion of the greenhouses could go. Remember that there are multiple buildings with the greenhouses. The Tropical House is the most architecturally interesting of those, although it's not the original greenhouse. And then there are other pieces of greenhouse there as well. So the question ultimately that the group explored is, where can these land, either entirely or some portion of those greenhouses land? So you see in Centennial Park, because of the size of the greenhouses, this location on the south end, on this slide, City Hall's on the right, was one location. An alternative location is between the Van Rolte statue and the fountain in the center. It's a smaller, more compressed site, probably would take a smaller portion of the building. But in both of those cases, the Parks Department and the suggestions from the community and the responses from the Parks Department were very favorable in terms of being able to use that facility in the context of Centennial Park, whether it's supporting the plants that are growing there, whether it's a facility that provides some gathering space within the park for other events that might happen, whether it's in part taking care of the Oz book in the off-season. A variety of different ideas have come up about how that could be used. And this is what it could look like. It's a little bit hard to see, but on the left of the fountain there is a footprint of a building. These were all done to scale, so we've got a relative sort of idea that these would fit in some way. So those were for Centennial Park. We also looked at the Civic Center and the potential there. We initially looked at within that south portion of the parking lot as maybe adding some greenhouses that could provide some covered space for market activities or other activities associated with the marketplace itself. Ended up in the northwest corner with 2 of the supporting greenhouses, not the Tropical House necessarily, but 2 of those that could provide some supporting space for the farmers market, but also in the winter. That diagram, this maybe shows it a little better. the area out in front of those buildings between the Civic Center itself and those greenhouses might be an ice skating area, or the concept of ice there so those buildings could be warming areas for the skating. But multiple purpose and multiple opportunities there. Again, this concept doesn't utilize the tropical house. So the concept was not only coming along 7th Street, do you pass those two greenhouses, but continuing further as you make the transition, Van Rolte would be on the left-hand side of this photograph. That's Washington Boulevard coming up the middle. In that triangle that the city owns, the notion was taking that tropical house or some portion of that and utilizing that in the neighborhood. A less defined sort of program opportunity for that at this point. But it was a notion to continue placement of the greenhouse type structures that helped to tell the story about the greenhouse. And that could look something like this with that greenhouse addressing the intersection of Washington and 9th Street. Then there was Window on the Waterfront, and this is one of those sites where there were multiple locations identified. And I'll just run through those, but you can tell where it's colored up. There's a sort of alternative sites, and each would sort of host an alternative program if you were to look at one of those possibilities. So the first option is at the foot of College Avenue and 6th Street. It would be locating some portion of the structure. It could be as small as the tropical house or some portion of the tropical house, or it could be the beginning of something that could grow much larger, more like a greenhouse conservatory type of a opportunity there. But that creates an opportunity most accessible sort of directly into downtown along College Avenue. Another alternative is further east on 6th Street. The peaking unit is on the left. The sculpture is next to that. And then in that gap between that and other development is the possibility of bringing a facility like this to that location. Third location would be out going beyond that sculpture. There's a walkway that takes you out into that area, utilizing the area just below the rise as a location for the sculpture or for the greenhouse, and that, that then opens up the whole area for that greenhouse. And then the fourth option within the park is over on Central Avenue. As Central Avenue turns and heads over to River Avenue at the end with a sewage treatment plant up here on the left, an opportunity maybe to energize some of the waterfront plans talked about an east-west connection along there. And if that east-west connection, pedestrian connection came along this street, it might give you an entree into Window on the Waterfront from that end. The uses in all of these cases would be garden related most likely, but could also be gathering spaces and more active kinds of uses. I think that's it. Yeah. So there were the multiple concepts for this. The focus really, as we talked about it, we talked with both the Historic District Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission, as Andy mentioned. We got together, and the consensus from both of those groups is let's focus first on Centennial. And in order to focus on Centennial, there needs to be a vision and management plan for the park before we can decide whether this is an element that should fit into that. So that's the request that we're talking about here. The focus is on that. Meanwhile, keep an eye on what's happening with Window on the Waterfront. There are so many unknowns in that area in terms of development opportunities, both public and private pieces to that. There were a lot of ideas thrown out in the visioning process for the waterfront, a lot of great ideas, and in fact there were places for greenhouses within that context. But at this point, we didn't think the greenhouse is probably the leader in those decisions. It may work well with another proposal that comes along, but timing is important to move this along in terms of the longevity of the existing greenhouses. So the focus really has been on Centennial Park as we're trying to move forward here.
Thanks, Phil. Questions from council? Dave?
Just in terms of general condition of the greenhouses, the tropical house, as you mentioned, is the most historically significant. And as I recall, the other ancillary buildings there, which might be the most original, I don't know what they are. As I recall, they're in pretty bad shape. Is that fair?
Portions of, yeah, they probably are in worse shape. I might have described it a little differently than you did. Most historically significant, I might have said most architecturally significant.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I think they're all together as a complex is the history of what's evolved there. But in terms of condition, yeah, there's, whatever portion gets relocated, there's significant work to do on any of those, whether it's just the tropical house or the others. There's a significant amount of work and bringing things up to codes and so forth. So there's an effort there.
And this is probably more of a functional question, but it may be too early to really think a lot about. But Centennial Park location on the south side, correct me if I'm wrong, we're like within 100 feet in more than one direction, I think, of the snowmelt system, correct?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to consider it as a event venue or something, that could be significant.
I know that was part of the discussions, Dave. You nailed it there.
Interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Dave, I would add too, you're right. It's kind of like in a related way where we talk about the JDY plant that's sitting there. Each year that it sits, it's not getting better. So, you know, you always hate to be kind of pushed into making a decision. It's nice where you'd think, hey, you have all the time in the world to make decisions. But and Phil discussed it, right? There is an element where there is a little bit of a time factor in here where I think you'll see some possibilities that rise and fall because of that reality.
Nikki, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. I know that Centennial Park was desirable because of the water, the utilities available to. And you said you might think of this being repurposed into a event center, or are you thinking like weddings or things like that? Or are you going to actually use it for what? Small,
Yeah.
Small
think
and
that
distanced
takes-
weddings.
I think that takes more study of the specific facility and how much you bring over and what fits. But
Okay.
yeah, it's intended, there might be a small wedding at the gazebo, and then they could have a breakout space for
Okay.
30 or 40 people. I think that's probably the maximum if you're talking a tropical house.
Okay.
But yeah, something
But you're
small.
thinking,
But I know the Parks Department is interested in it for its utilitarian
Okay.
aspects of it,
So
for
it
helping
could-
to serve the park as well. So that's part of the
Okay.
discussion.
I think if it was an event center or a small wedding or a renewal of vows, there'd be another parking or congestion issue in that area, which is already congested enough. Oh, of course, we'll have bikes. We'll
You
have
can bike
everybody
there,
coming on
yeah.
bikes. Okay. So I just wondered if, I'm sure you've considered all that, but,
We
Yeah.
stayed away from 10th Street.
yes.
So, Scott?
So we would meet the intent of the executive order if we kept it to 30 people, right? So, I guess maybe I missed something in the conversation because we approved a greenhouse, we built a greenhouse, and then the thought was whether we keep this existing structure or not. Did I miss that in the conversation? One, why we're keeping it? That's one question, I guess. I know it had some historical value, and the historical district kind of said they had some input on that. So I'd like to clarify that first, and then secondly is why not the same location where it's at? What's prohibiting us from leaving it in the same location and just upgrading on site if that's the decision we're going to make to keep it?
I think it'll ultimately come back to you guys to decide what to do with that. These are just options of what we might do with that. I think we're a long ways away from deciding that yet. I think we'll get through this master planning process to see if, option A or whatever we're calling it is appropriate at Centennial Park, and to see what we can do with it. From a park perspective, it doesn't have much value in the location that it's at anymore. With the addition of the new greenhouse by the parks office and building, that location doesn't meet our needs anymore. So that's one reason why we're looking at what to do with this. We've had lots of conversations in the past about this property prior to building the new greenhouse, and so those are just continuing on now.
So part of the discussion that I recall was we'd have to put this back to its almost current or its historical context, right? And that was going to be very costly to do.
Yeah, maybe.
Is the position of the Historical Society changed? I mean, on that, because
No.
when you move it, you're still going to be moving a significant portion of it. Things are going to break, it's going to cost us a significant amount of money to move this. This
Sure.
isn't going to be just a,
Nope.
so, I mean, I don't know, we've had that conversation about whether or not
Yeah, go ahead.
to
Yeah,
keep it or not.
I think it's a great question. The whole discussion that I left out of what I talked about was the Historic District Commission's role if and when this moves forward in some fashion. And making a determination on the historical appropriateness of all of this is a piece of what they'll have to look at. Whether they would approve a relocation is one question, how much of the building is necessary to maintain its integrity, whether they'd approve delisting it, or recommend that it be delisted. I mean, there are a number of steps they can go through and will need to go through when a particular site is determined to be the most appropriate.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the appropriate word to use, but I'm a little giddy about the plans I've seen. I mean, it's kind of neat. I like to see the idea of us doing something with this. It's really kind of neat. But I also want to take into consideration the cost of doing business with regard to this property. And then also, if we do this, is the Historical Society going to, district, excuse me, going to require us to maintain that at that designation at the new location? Has that been discussed?
And we do not have any determination on their part at that yet. What we're working towards, and with the commissions meeting together as well as being involved in the process and the workshops, is trying to get everybody on the same page in terms of an understanding about what the realities are as far as the building goes, what's doable, what isn't, how do they use historic preservation in this whole discussion, use it or honor it in the discussion. They've talked around all of that, but without a specific proposal in front of them, there isn't a vote on that at all.
So I'm a little confused. What are we talking about? Are we talking about moving the greenhouse or Centennial Park Master Plan? I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, so the greenhouse conversation was just an add-on it's just an update of where we're at with that, because we've talked about that over the course of the last year or two. The master plan process came out of discussions about what to do with the greenhouse in light with Centennial Park. We just thought it was vastly important to do a significant look at doing a master plan for Centennial Park prior to even recommending we move that structure potentially to that park. We don't even know if it's appropriate. It may come back that the historic architect and landscape architects say, no, this isn't a great spot for this. Don't even do this. It doesn't make sense here. It's too busy, it's too big, it's too small, whatever it might be. So I think in the future, over the course of the winter, if we do this master plan, we'll then we'll come back and we'll talk more about the direction for the greenhouse, probably in the spring, late winter, early spring.
Okay, that clears it up, thanks.
Yep.
I am not I know we're so early on, but I'm not in agreeing with putting it in Centennial Park. One of the reasons for that is, it's a beautiful park, and to obstruct the views with a tall structure like that, I'm not in agreement with that. So that's where I am at the initial stages of that.
Sure.
Anyone else?
If I could just
Yeah,
add on
go
to
ahead, Phil.
that comment. As Andy described the process, it's to put the vision and management plan together first, and then evaluate a possible moving. That was very clear in the conversations with the different Parks Commission and the Historic District Commission, and that's really a critical piece to keep in mind. There isn't an assumption that it's going to fit there. that it's the right place for it, but there is an assumption that that's a preferred location and we need to evaluate it.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
7:15 exactly. Multiple city property updates and possibilities for transactions. Mr. Van Beek.
You're just putting a lot of pressure on Matt Van Dyken, who's going to handle this next item to see if we can actually hit that 8 o'clock adjournment time.
Well, I see him reaching for his wallet to give a $20,000 check to Andy Kenyon, so.
Spray first, Matt, spray first.
Actually, Andy did a very nice job of spraying and remembering to spray between
Excellent.
each and every participant.
Very good. I might have missed once or twice.
You might have missed once or twice. We'll give you credit for that, though. All right, good evening, all of you. We've had quite a few interesting topics this evening, so I will bring you to some property discussion. If you remember correctly, back in January of 2008, the Property Brothers brought some recommendations back to this body in the form of recommendations and a report. You then tasked Keith, and through Keith, myself, with disposing of some of the properties that were available. If you remember, we did a property on 10th Street, and we did a property on 16th Street, and through an RFP process, those were through a bid process, through an RFP process, we addressed the large property at 36th Street. Those are considered Tier 2 properties. If you also remember way back, some of you weren't here, but we disposed of a city property up actually in Holland Charter Township off of Elberdeen, and we did that by listing it with a realtor. So just some background. So these are surplus properties. So the good news is only one of these properties was actually discussed in that property review committee process. So what we're looking at is to get council's temperature on whether or not we move forward with the process of declaring these properties as surplus and then offering them for sale to the public. For 3 of them, and there's one more. So the first property, this is in the area of 29th and Homestead. So this area, if you look on the map, you see a little red box, and next to that you see a bunch of kind of silver squares. Those used to be the bleachers that Tulip Time stored. So this is a transportation services yard off of 29th Street, off of Ottawa. We were actually approached by a neighbor that actually owns 3 properties in this area that are kind of group living facilities where folks maybe aren't quite able to live completely on their own, but can live outside of mom and dad, on whether or not the city would consider disposing of some of that property. If you look really close, there's kind of it almost looks like a pond in there. That's actually a concrete pad where they put some of the snow to melt. So we had a discussion with Brian, kind of talking about the use of this facility, and this is a property that was designated as to keep through that process. We had a discussion with Brian. They do use this yard, but they do have a lot more of the yard available for their use now that Tulip Time no longer keeps their bleachers in there. I think they kept them there for a couple of decades. So we do have some more property. They do not utilize anything to the west of that concrete pad, which is the area that we're talking about. So we would still have to go through a process. We'd have to come back to you. We could decide if we wanted to offer multiple parcels for sale, if we wanted to offer this as one parcel for sale. And then we would probably recommend that you undergo some kind of a bid process to dispose of that property. But as of right now, and I actually walked it, it kind of goes up a little hill and then drops because, believe it or not, it sounds like we used to dump the street sweepings years and years and years ago back in there. So there's probably quite a bit of sand and some miscellaneous stuff, but that would be the process kind of moving forward. If you as city council kind of said, yep, okay, we think we will at least consider this and we would like you to move this forward. That's really the temperature that we're taking for you right now. This is looking north at Homestead. So it's a nice wooded area, and then that pad would kind of be back. You can't see what I'm pointing to. So the pad would be kind of back in here. And then within the yard itself, you can see the hill and some of the wooded area back in here. Again, Transportation Services Department doesn't really use anything to the east, to the west of this piece. And that if you chose to pursue this, what could be considered surplus property and offered for sale.
Matt, you're creating a flag lot. You proposing then to extend the cul-de-sac?
Actually, we're not creating a flag lot, Mike. Homestead goes all the way through. So if
The
you look-
right-of-way does, but the roadway does not at this point.
The right-of-way
correct?
does not, and the current home is served off of a driveway. So there are a couple options. We could extend the cul-de-sac. The water and sanitary sewer come through that cul-de-sac, or we could create that road going forward. Right now, the road on Homestead Avenue is essentially a driveway.
you're
So
gonna
we're not
create a-
actually creating a flag lot. The right-of-way continues in front of the properties.
Is this zone,
Bad choice of words, I'm sorry.
This is Homestead, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so you're just extending the cul-de-sac to the west then?
Well, there are a couple options that we can work through and come back to you with a recommendation once we get to that point. Really, the intent tonight is, would you even consider this? Because I'm not, on all of these, Mike, I'm not going to have all the questions for you answered tonight. We're just not, clearly not, I know.
I've been
We're just-
around here for a number of years, you should anticipate.
We don't want to invest the time and quite frankly, the money at this point if the council says, you know what, that's really not anything we're interested in doing. So really, that's the intent tonight.
it's fun to see the aerial view.
Yeah. Other questions that Matt can't answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this zoned residential or commercial? What
I
is-
believe this is zoned residential.
Okay, so
But we
that's
can
good.
verify that again as we go through this process.
Matt, as soon as you said that little rise there is made up of the street sweepings,
Mhm.
and environmental flags went off in my head.
So we'll address all of this.
Okay.
The property that we sold in Holland Township was the former HPD shooting range. So I'm not very concerned at this point that we can't work through any issues that might arise.
It's all organic.
Yeah, Scott,
Maybe I shouldn't bring this up. I've talked a lot tonight. I apologize if I've talked too much.
we're still right on track with time, Scott, so
Yeah, I
don't
know
worry
you
about
said.
it.
So, I mean, we made an effort, a conscious effort to, when we had surplus property on 36th Street, to solicit ideas for that property. Are we likewise would we do something similar to this, or is that premature to even ask that question?
So really, a lot of that depends on the scale of what we're doing. The nice thing about this is that actually is already platted lots. So there are lots laid out that we could very easily sell just the lots themselves. Unfortunately, I think if you look at just kind of the scale of this piece, no one's gonna come up with a master plan that includes a cul-de-sac and multiple. There's just not the scale there for something like this. We're at 36th Street, we had an opportunity to say, okay, it's, show us what you might think might go in here. I think we're very limited on what might actually go in here. And that's why I would, when the time comes, I suspect that we will recommend to you that we go through some kind of a bid process and then offer those up for sale through that process.
Thank you.
How big is the lot?
So it is about 150 feet wide, and that's whatever the normal block length is.
Yeah.
So, and we could vary that, right? It's up to us on what we want to sell, what portion of this we want to sell. Everything kind of lines up at about 150 feet, and if you look to that lot dead to the south, that is 150 feet wide. So we just kind of took, okay, this makes some sense, let's ask the council if they're interested, and if they're not, then we'll stop, and if they are, then we'll continue to answer questions as we go along.
Anyone else questions? Yeah. I know that we can't make a decision here tonight, but if you're looking for a head nod.
Absolutely, we can read the room, so to speak. Okay, so that was our first one of the day. The second one of the day, this is down off of Lincoln, M40. So if you remember 2 years ago, we actually did some work down on Interchange Drive, did a lot of work on Interchange Drive to improve the safety of that area, and I really think it has helped. What that did is on this map, if you look, follow the cursor, we added right-of-way. This piece is in the right-of-way, and it's actually a detention basin with the Ottawa County Dairying Commission. But on the south side, it created this funky little, and I'm gonna use that as a technical term, cutout of the right-of-way. So we were approached by the adjacent property owner, in this case, this is Teddy's Transport, that's adjacent to us, about, hey, would you consider at all selling that property? So some of the due diligence that we've done to date is that that parcel is only 5,800 square feet in commercial zoning. So there's really no value to anyone else except that adjacent property owner. There's really no value to us as the city. We actually did go through the process, and Teddy's at their own expense staked out this tentative parcel map. Brian and I were both able to go down and take a look at it. Let me take one step back. Within that property review committee plan, there were a number of properties that were identified as really having no use except to the adjacent landowner. This one very clearly seems to fall in that description. Nobody can build on this parcel. It's just far too small. It's probably not much bigger than this room. So there's really nothing that can go on down there. So this is one we would likely have an appraisal done, either done internally by our own internal appraisers, or by a professional appraiser outside of our organization, negotiate a price and come back to you with a purchase offer. This, again, since it's of no value to anyone but the adjacent property owner, we'll see how the appraisal comes out, but it may not have as much value as we would hope. But it does clean up a couple things, cleans up our right-of-way and cleans up their property.
I'd be curious to see the comps on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to be clear, Matt, this would not be a bid situation.
No, this situation, we would, again, enter into a negotiation on the city's behalf with that property owner and come back with a negotiated purchase price because, again, of basically no value to anyone else. That's the view, just in case this is Interchange Drive. If you haven't been down there, there's always a lot of activity that's going on in that area, but it appears now to be happening in a much safer manner. So thank you to Brian and his crew for cleaning that up down there. And again, you can see this is the property corner. The bushes to the left are about where that piece ends. So it's not a very large piece. I'm going to read the room and we'll proceed with that one. I want to just make one other comment before I move on to the next property. These take some, such as this one, could come back to you quite quickly. Some could come back to you in a month or two, and some may take 6 months to a year to actually see their way through the whole process. But since we had a number that we knew we were going to be working on, we thought it would make sense to come back to you all at one time. So you're not going to get all of these next week, but we will continue to pick away at them just like we have the ones before. All right, the next one is actually on the other side of the highway interchange. So when we realigned 64th Street to come in alignment with K-Bill Drive, there was a large purchase of property to allow that to happen. That left an orphaned parcel that you can see a little bit clearer in this piece. So kind of the contextual photo and then coming in a little bit closer. We've had a number of contacts about this piece of property over the last several months to several years. It is about an acre plus or minus, and it does appear to be buildable. It does have utilities in it. We know that's going to be an issue. Those may have to be relocated. But we actually went through and talked to the drain commissioners about this as well on both these properties, and they're good with it. But this property probably has some value to it. In addition to our property, there appears to be some additional MDOT surplus property immediately to the south. If someone wanted to pursue that with MDOT, they could. I would not envy them if they chose to go in that direction. But this process, this property, we've gone to the point of having Holland Engineering actually do the layout. This is very confusing in this area because of that highway interchange. We know that the parcel will have some issues because of those utilities that we'll need to work through with a potential buyer. But this is one also that if you were to choose to list this or choose to declare this property as surplus, we would likely list this with a realtor or recommend to you that we do so because we have some more value here. And the open market may bear more fruit than anything that we might do. I see Mike kind of looking hard at this one. Mike, we would require that their into and out of would be off of 64th Street, not off of M40. If we allowed them to come directly in and out of M40, we'd obviously be creating probably a worse situation than the one we just fixed.
What I was really looking at hard was I believe just to the north of that, we mitigated some wetland because of that transition, and I'm wondering if push comes to shove, every once in a while, we're looking for mitigated wetland type of scenarios, such as mire and things like that. I understand there's a lot of value, but this may be a piece of property that could be considered for that because of the topography.
Yeah, it's pretty high. When I was out and I actually went out and took pictures. You can see kind of McDonald's there in the background, and then from McDonald's looking across. It's pretty high. And again, I don't have an answer to that question at this point. I would think that highway frontage, especially in that corridor, it would make more sense to us to pursue wetland mitigation in other locations. But
from a financial standpoint, Matt, I understand that.
Yep.
But we went through a lot of trouble to clean up that intersection from a safety standpoint, to have a gas station pop there to take away that safety factor and vision, that sight vision.
Yeah, and Brian and I had a couple of those discussions kind of early on when we talked through this. That would be top of mind to those of us that know some of the folks that were killed down on that stretch of highway. I think safety is at the very utmost top of all of our minds. So we would not allow anything dangerous to happen in that area. And again, we don't have all the answers for you at this point. And we could get to a point where, just the process isn't going to allow something to happen there, but there are also some other opportunities in that area.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. The last one. I got a sense of.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, I've been with these guys long enough to read them pretty. I'm feeling it. All right, our last piece actually is a purchase. So, we have a piece of property that has probably come up on a survey as actually being a very, very small orphaned parcel. This parcel is 10 feet by 2.2 or 2.4 feet. So it's about 20 square feet. So if I put my arms out, I'm about 20 square feet. Just to give you reference. I could have used others, but it makes Keith laugh when I do things like this.
That made it too easy, man.
It did. So this is actually in the area roughly behind Fricano's. We have an alleyway that runs through here. Mm-hmm. This piece apparently has bounced around a little bit. So what happens, and I actually had the widow of a gentleman that did this quite a bit in my office very early on, and when I started in the manager's office, there are speculators that will just buy property, not understanding really what they are. Her husband had done that, and she was not happy with him even then for doing that and leaving her with some of these parcels.
Buying it on tax sale? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Okay.
Yep. So we were notified by the county that an unknown owner had let this go back to tax sale. We've done some math. It would probably be a few $100s for us to purchase that piece of property before it would potentially come back to us in a tax sale situation. I think you're all familiar that sometimes we can get properties back that way. When this does come up for sale, we would likely recommend to you that the $500 or so is probably worth us procuring that so that somebody else doesn't, and we get control of that property. In theory, if you look at the map, they could block off, someone could buy that and block off that alleyway to public access because it's privately owned. I don't see a situation where someone would, but there are a lot of times that I don't see situations where people would do things and they do them. So, again, this is upcoming. This has got to go through the process at the county, but likely when this does come up and available for sale, we will recommend to you that we do purchase that. We did secure what essentially is a first right of refusal through the county at no cost to the city, so that when it does come up for sale, we'll be notified and we can recommend to you that we make that purchase. So those are the 4 properties that I have for you this evening. Again, this would kick us off and start us to go through the normal formal process of declaring property as a surplus. You have to have a public hearing. We can have that public hearing, declare them, and then we can offer them for sale.
Questions for Matt? Well done, sir. Appreciate it. I've got 7:45 other business.
None for me.
All right. Anyone else? Then we are adjourned. Excellent. Congratulations. You brought us in under the wire.
Good job, Matt.
Matt.